All right, you can advance to the next slide if you would, please. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. To read the full notice of your rights and protections, go to www.boston.org/MPO_NO_DISCRIMINATION. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Betsy Harvey via the chat box or at eharvey@ctps.org or at 857-702-3701. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Betsy Harvey of the MPO staff at eharvey@ctps.org or call at 857-702-3701. Time for introductions. I'm David Moeller from Secretary Fee and DACA here. Please call the roll.
Will do. Mass DOT Chair.
David Moeller, I'm here.
Mass DOT Seat 2.
Good morning, John Bouchard, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver here.
Mass DOT Highway.
Mass DOT Highway, John Romano here.
MBTA.
Good morning, this is Allie Clayman representing Interim General Manager Jeff Gonneville and the MBTA.
Massport.
Hi, good morning. This is Sarah Lee representing Massport.
MAPC Vice Chair.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
MBTA Advisory Board.
I'm not seeing Brian Kane or Amira Patterson yet.
Great, thanks, Erin. Advisory Council.
Honor Diggins, Advisory Council here. Thanks.
City of Boston BTD.
Bill Conroy, representing Mayor Wu in the city of Boston.
City of Boston BPDA.
Jeff Fitzgerald with BPDA representing Mayor Wu in the city of Boston.
At-large City, City of Everett.
Good morning, Jay Monty representing Mayor DeMaria in the city of Everett.
At-large City, City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller and the city of Newton.
At-large Town, Town of Arlington.
I am not seeing Claire Ricker or any other representatives.
Okay, thank you. At-large Town, Town of Brookline.
Good morning, Rob King representing Town of Brookline, Charles Carey, Town Administrator. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Intercorp Committee, City of Somerville.
This is Brad Rawson representing City of Somerville, Mayor Katiana Ballantyne, and the Intercorp subregion. Tom Bent will be joining us in a few minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
I am not seeing Austin Saganowitz yet.
Okay, thank you. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, representing the Metro West region and Mayor Charles.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing the North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly for Mayor Michael Cahill. And just to note that our alternate Dylan Lukich will be taking over at 10:45.
Thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Melissa for North Suburban Planning Council.
South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull.
Not seeing Jennifer Constable.
Thank you. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Not seeing Peter Pelletier.
Okay. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Steve Lowenoff, representing to the Pick subregion.
Okay. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
And Federal Transit Administration.
Not seeing any representatives from Federal Transit.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Judy. Next item on the agenda is Chair's report. I don't have one, so we'll go directly into the Executive Director's report. Tegan.
Mr. Chair, welcome everybody. If we could go to the next slide, please. I have a relatively short update today. So first of all, I've been providing some regular updates around the long range plan and just wanted to highlight that we, if any project proponents or municipal representatives have any questions about the draft long range transportation plan universe of roadway projects that we discussed at the last MPO meeting, please reach out to the contacts you see on this slide. Please reach out to Bradley Putnam as the interim LRTP manager, as well as copying Ethan Lapointe and Logan Casey, who are our kind of main tip contacts. So those are your contacts if you have questions. And our next steps regarding the long range plan will be to discuss the draft universe again at the March 30th MPO meeting. Next slide, please. So today's agenda has one action item and two presentations. I always like to just summarize them at the beginning of the meeting. So in addition to the action item to endorse transit asset management performance targets, you will also have the opportunity to hear two presentations. The first will be the Cape Ann Transportation Authority and the Metro West RTA capital planning processes. So they will present about their capital planning processes. And then the second presentation will be by Ethan Lapointe with others here to provide additional information, answer questions, and that will be about the cost increases related to any of the MPO target funded projects in the federal fiscal year 23 to 27 TIP. So that's today. Next slide, please. As a reminder, we have two more MPO meetings scheduled in March. One will be next week on March 16th, and the following one will be on March 30th. Next week, the potential agenda items will likely include endorsement of the transit safety performance targets, the discussion of the 24 to 28 TIP preliminary project programming scenarios, which is the funding scenarios that you begin discussing in March. And then, as I mentioned, some more discussion around the long range plan, but next week will likely be the investment programs. We will also have a UPWP committee meeting on March 16th at 1 p.m. following that MPO meeting. And I just wanted to highlight that I'll be away for the March 16th meeting. I did send an email out to board members, but I'll be back for the March 30th meeting. And in the meantime, I've asked Annette Dempster, who you're all very familiar with, our Director of Policy and Planning, who oversees the MPO activity staff, to take my place for this report at the beginning of the next meeting. So if you have any questions about MPO items in between then and the March 30th meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out to Annette or any of your usual contacts around the TIP, UPWP, and the long range plan. And that, Mr. Chair, is all I have.
Thank you, Tegan. Are there questions for Tegan? Lynn Diggins.
Just quickly, forgive me if this was mentioned last week by Michelle. Any sense of when we might see the needs assessment for the LRTP?
Let me ask if Annette, if you have an answer on the timing on that. I'm sorry, I don't have that offhand.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, we're starting to pull all the information that we collected together now, and so we will be working on documenting that. That is going to go into a story map format.
Okay.
So it will take a little bit of time to get that all developed and processed. I don't have a specific deadline for that right now.
Okay, all right, thank you, appreciate it.
Bill Conroy, your hand is raised. Is it still raised from when we took the roll, or you have a question? He's okay. Thank you, Bill. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, if you want to comment during the meeting, raise your hand and we will try to call on you. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Derek Cravat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let everyone know, as Tegan mentioned, the UPWP committee will be meeting next Thursday at 1 p.m. We'll be getting a first look at the proposed list of studies for the 2024 work program for CTPS and MAPC. So everybody is welcome to attend. We'll also be taking up a potential UPWP amendment since FTA has asked that we amend in a planning grant that the MBTA received to study transit-oriented development along the Redlet. So we'll be looking at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Jay Monty. Oh, I'm sorry. Does anybody have any questions for Derek? Seeing none. Jay Monty.
Good morning, everybody. Just a quick update on the Congestion Management Committee upcoming meeting. So it's actually been moved. Last week I told you it was going to be on the 30th of March. It's actually been moved to the 23rd of March, so 2 weeks from today at 9 a.m. And again, we'll be discussing roadway pricing and some study work that CTPS will be doing around that. Also want to thank Sarah Lee from Massport and Amir Patterson from the MBT Advisory Board for stepping up to join the committee. We still have 2 more vacancies to fill, so if anybody else is interested, please reach out to myself and we will get you involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Any questions for Jay? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn Diggins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We had a meeting yesterday. Ethan LaPointe came and talked with us about, the TIP universe, pretty much what we had seen in our previous meeting. And through a quirk of the calendar, we got to see the universe, or there are universe of UPWP studies, and I know it's nothing for me to say I'm excited about the universe and UPWP studies, but this one really is phenomenal. And you can go to the calendar listing for our meeting yesterday, and then you can get the PDF of it. 35 pages, just high quality potential studies. So we are going to be having a meeting sooner than usual. So on the 22nd, to talk about that universe some more, and also to discuss the scenarios that we are going to get here on the 16th, so that the advisory board can do more input earlier in the process. So everyone's welcome to that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next item on the agenda is the minutes from February 2nd, 2023. Can I get a motion and a second from the members to approve the minutes? And please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa with MAPC. I make a motion to approve the February 2nd MPO meeting minutes.
Brian Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note I'm here, and I'm happy to second Eric's motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, Judy, please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Brad Rawson,
Brad Rawson, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Melissa Tintakoulis,
Melissa Tintakoulis, yes.
and Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Great, motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Transit Asset Management Performance Targets. Sam Taylor and Angela, I'm sorry, Cervello. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sam Taylor. I am the Performance-Based Planning and Program Manager at CTPS, and I will be presenting the state fiscal year 2023 Transit Asset Management Targets. And near the middle of this presentation, you will hear from Angela Cervello from the MBTA, and she will present the MBTA's Transit Asset Management Targets. Next slide, please. Oh, I believe these slides are Angela's from the MBTA. Aaron, if we could skip ahead, perhaps, I believe Angela has about 8 or 9 slides. If we could skip ahead and then maybe go back. Perhaps a couple more.
Apologies, I'm not seeing it in this slide deck. Let me pull up the other one just real quick.
Okay. Yes, this is it. Thank you. And I guess we can go to the next slide. Apologies, everybody. So there are a few key items to note about this presentation today. The FTA requires transit agencies and MPOs to set targets for transit asset management performance measures as part of the federal TAM rule. After this presentation, we'll be requesting that you take a vote on the new targets. And today's staff recommendation is that the board update the TAM targets, which reflect new data. The MPO can consider transit asset performance as part of reviewing capital programming for the transit improvement program. And also a memo for this discussion is available on the MPO meeting calendar, which includes all the 2023 targets as well as the 2022 performance data. Next slide, please. So a brief overview of this presentation. As with past sets of performance targets, I will provide a brief overview on performance-based planning and this year's target setting cycles. I will give a quick overview of the transit asset management performance measures, which the board will vote on after this presentation. And then Angela Cervello of MBTA's capital planning program will take over and present the MBTA TAM targets for 2023. After the MBTA targets, we will present targets for the other 2 RTAs, CADA and the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. Following that, we will address a few opportunities for improving transit assets. And as always, there will be time for questions prior to the requested action, which is the vote on the 2023 targets. Next slide, please. So you may have seen this graphic in past presentations about federal target setting. A reminder, these transit asset targets are set annually. Transit asset management conditions are the second set of annual targets that the board is being asked to adopt. The transit asset management targets must be set by the end of the current TIP development cycle. And next week, the next MPO meeting on March 16th, the transit safety targets will be presented before the board. Next slide, please. There are a few resources for more information on performance-based planning as it relates to today's presentation. The performance page on the MPO's website has current information about measures, targets, and other details about the MPO's performance-based planning activities. The archive page lists targets from previous years. To learn more about these federally required performance measures and targets, please check out the MPO's tip page, the Transit Improvement Program document, particularly Chapter 4, which is the performance analysis chapter. Additionally, information about the Commonwealth's performance and related targets is available, and you can view that on MassDOT's tracker website, which is mass.tracker.com. Next slide, please. So the purpose of setting performance targets for transit assets is to ensure that the region's transit assets are in a state of good repair. The FTA requires transit providers that receive federal funds and own, operate, or manage capital assets to provide public transportation to establish targets each year for federally required transit asset management performance measures. RTAs develop these TAM plans and update them annually with the performance targets. The MPO then sets TAM targets for their regions, and the MPO considers transit capital programming in the context of transit asset management performance. Next slide, please. This diagram here outlines different actors' roles in developing transit asset management targets. The United States Department of Transportation establishes measures on transit assets for various asset classes. Then regional transit agencies set targets on measures for their relevant assets. That's the middle box for our region. That middle box in blue for our region, the relevant transit agencies are MBTA, CATA, and the MWRTA. And after that, after RTAs set their targets, the MPO works with agencies to set or revisit regional targets. Next slide, please. So the federally required performance measures that will be discussed in the next few slides cover a subset of transit system assets and focus on specific condition metrics for asset types. The 4 asset categories that pertain to the Boston region's RTAs are rolling stock, which are measured by the percentage of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark, or ULB. Equipment, which are non-revenue vehicles such as service trucks, which is measured by the percentage of vehicles that have met or exceeded their ULB. Facilities, which include parking structures, maintenance buildings, and administrative locations. And the measure is the percentage of assets with a condition rating below 3.0 on the FTA term scale. The term scale is the Transit Economic Requirements Model Scale. This is a 1 through 5 scale, and RTAs must have a consistent documented method for rating its facilities. A score of 3 or higher indicates adequate performance. That means that a facility with the minimum passing score of 3 has only moderate defects and has not exceeded its useful life. And the 4th asset class is infrastructure, such as tracks for light and heavy rail, which are measured by the percentage of track segments with performance restrictions by mode. And that 4th asset category only applies to the MBTA. For all measures, we want the values to decrease. So when you see down arrows on the following presentation slides, things are moving in the desired direction. I must also note that as we go through the targets, you can follow along with the tables in the memo. Rolling stock is in table 2 on page 6. Equipment is in table 3 on page 7. Facilities is in table 4 on page 8. And fixed guideway infrastructure is in table 5 on page 9. Next slide, please. So in general, targets reflect a 1-year time frame. They are based on transit agencies' condition assessments, planning, and financial projections. They do not result in rewards or penalties for transit agencies, states, or MPOs. And when proposing state fiscal year 2023 regional targets, MPO staff incorporated targets from transit agencies. And we also listed MBTA, CATA, and MWRTA targets separately, with some reorganization of asset categories. An example of this could be the reorganization of asset categories to account for things like the removal of a type of vehicle in the rolling stock. Next slide, please. And I believe here I am going to turn it over to Angela Cervello so that she can present the MBTA's 2023 targets.
Thank you, Sam. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful, thanks. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Angela Cervello. I am part of the MBTA Capital Program Planning Team, and I am going to be walking through our performance measures and targets. Next slide, please. So as you just heard, the MBTA is required each year to report performance measures on the state of our asset classes for the current year, as well as set targets for the next year. So today I will be sharing our measures or actuals for fiscal year 22, as well as the targets the MBTA has set for fiscal year 23. The 4 asset categories are rolling stock, equipment, facilities, and infrastructure. I do want to note that the MBTA has a really diverse and complex asset inventory that includes more than just these 4 categories that I'm going to be discussing. However, these are the 4 categories the FTA has requested agencies report on for the transit asset management performance measures. Next slide. So moving right into rolling stock, this asset category refers to revenue vehicles that provide passenger service to customers. This includes buses, rail cars, locomotives, ferry boats, and paratransit vans and automobiles. The performance measure for this asset category uses age as a proxy for state of good repair and focuses on the percentage of revenue vehicles that have reached or exceeded their useful life benchmark. In this case, a lower measure indicates better fleet condition overall. As a reminder, the useful life benchmark, or ULB, estimates the expected life cycle of a fleet and is assigned based on vehicle type and expected performance. I do want to note that the age of a vehicle does not necessarily reflect its condition or performance. There can be older vehicles that perform well, even if they are beyond the useful life benchmark. Next slide, please. So this table compares our fiscal year 21 and 22 measures or actuals, as well as the targets that we have set for fiscal year 23. This measure is reported at the vehicle type level, so that second column in the table. We are seeing a steady trend of overall improvement for this category, and we expect that to continue overall into fiscal year 23. Most significantly, the percent of paratransit vehicles that have reached their useful life benchmark has been reduced to 0. This is due to the ride fleet replacement project completing in fiscal year 22, which allowed the older vehicles to be retired. So the older vehicles are no longer in our inventory. Our measure for bus increased from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, primarily due to delays in the procurement of new fleets. I do want to point out that the trolley buses were retired from service in March of last year. And although they were included in the fiscal year 22 inventory, they will not appear in the fiscal year 23 inventory. So that category will be removed from the reporting moving forward after this year. Our fiscal year 23 targets also account for the continued delivery of the new commuter rail coaches, as well as fairly conservative targets for delivery of additional red and orange line vehicles. Next slide, please. So moving into equipment, this asset category refers to the non-revenue rubber tire or steel wheel vehicles that serve in a support capacity. This includes first response vehicles, tow trucks, spot tampers, crane cars, snow plows, and others. Similar to rolling stock, the equipment performance measure focuses on the percentage of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. I want to note again that age does not necessarily determine vehicle performance, and this is especially true for non-revenue vehicles. Some equipment is stored indoors and used sporadically and can perform adequately even if beyond the ULB. Next slide, please. So the overall percentage of non-revenue vehicles at or beyond the ULB increased from 18% to 22% in fiscal year 22. This was due to a large number of vehicles reaching their useful life benchmark, as well as the non-cyclical nature of vehicle retirement. Vehicles aren't necessarily retired in consistent quantities or at consistent times throughout the year. So this process doesn't necessarily follow the fiscal year cycle that the asset performance measures and targets follow. The target for fiscal year 23 accounts for the addition of 6 new transit police vehicles, as well as the expected retirement of 39 older support vehicles over the course of this year. However, we do expect that this measure will continue to increase in fiscal year 23 as additional vehicles reach their useful life benchmark. Next slide. All right, moving into facilities. This category includes 2 asset types. The first is passenger and parking facilities, and the other is maintenance and administrative facilities. This measure uses condition ratings to indicate state of good repair. The condition rating is a composite score based on an on-site assessment of multiple facility components, and it uses the 1 to 5 term scale, where 1 indicates poor condition and 5 indicates excellent condition. This performance measure focuses on the percentage of facility assets that are below a 3 on this scale, which would indicate either poor or fair condition. Per FTA requirements, each facility asset is assessed on a 4-year cycle. And this means that each year only a subsection of the facility's inventory is eligible for an updated condition rating. So even though the MBTA is investing in state of good repair and modernization improvements to our stations and facilities, many of these improvements are not reflected in the condition assessment data until several years following the completion of the project. Next slide, please. So fiscal year 22 performance reflects updated condition ratings for some of our passenger and parking facilities, as well as administrative and maintenance facilities supporting bus. This also accounts for the addition of facilities assets related to GLX, Green Line Extension, as well as new trailers supporting administrative functions at some of our transit facilities. We are expecting no change in administrative and maintenance facility condition during this year's round of condition assessments. However, the fiscal year 23 target for passenger and parking does reflect some commuter rail assets that we expect to receive lower condition ratings this year. Next slide, please. So the last measure, infrastructure, focuses on the percentage of track miles with speed restrictions as a proxy for state of good repair. Speed restrictions are slow zones where the maximum permissible speed of transit vehicles is set to a value below the full service speed. And these can be caused by track defects, signaling issues, construction zones, maintenance work, really a variety of causes. Permanent restrictions are not related to things like curves in the track, are not counted in this measure. Next slide, please. Performance improved between fiscal year 21 and 22 for light rail and commuter rail. However, heavy rail speed restrictions did increase significantly. Our target for fiscal year 23 for commuter rail is set at 4%. That is based on historic performance and expected conditions this fiscal year. For transit, in coordination with the MBTA Engineering and Maintenance Group, we have set an aggressive target of 2% for both heavy and light rail. This is intended to reflect the MBTA's continued commitment to improving the condition of our track assets and reducing speed restrictions overall on the rapid transit system. This concludes my portion of the presentation. With that, I will pass this back to Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. We will now move to the targets for CADA and MWRTA. So for CADA and MWRTA, rolling stock asset types include buses, vans, cutaway vehicles, and trolleys. And for all of these assets, the key performance measure is useful life benchmark, or ULB. CADA has 3 vehicle types, buses, of which 25% exceeded the ULB in 2022. The target for buses in 2023 has increased slightly to 30%. Cutaway vehicles, which had a performance of 63%, that is 63% of cutaway vehicles exceeding ULB in 2022. The target for this is anticipated to improve to just 5% in 2023. And trolleys, of which 100% exceeded the ULB in 2022, and the target for 2023 will improve to 30%. MWRTA has two vehicle types, vans, 0% of which exceeded the ULB in 2022, and none of which are expected to exceed ULB in 2023. And cutaway vehicles, 8% of which exceeded ULB in 2022, and the target for this has actually increased to 25% in 2023. Next slide, please. The next measure is for equipment vehicles. Equipment vehicles include assets such as maintenance or construction vehicles, not vehicles that transport the public. The key performance measure, again, is ULB. 100% of equipment vehicles for CADA exceeded the useful life benchmark in 2022, and the target remains the same in 2023. And for MWRTA, 36% of equipment vehicles exceeded ULB in 2022, and the target is expected to be, or the target has been set for 50% in 2023. The reason for the latter for MWRTA is that there's an expected aging of a few service trucks. Next slide, please. Another asset type that is measured is facilities. Facilities are grouped into two classes, either administrative and maintenance or passenger and parking. Both CADA and MWRTA each own just one facility, CADA's loan facility in Gloucester and the Blandon facility in Framingham for MWRTA. Both facilities exceed the 3.0 term scale rating of the Transit Economic Requirements Model Scale. And so the figures for the percentage of facilities with a rating of less than 3 in 2022, as well as the 2023 target, is 0. Next slide, please. Now that we have presented the information about transit asset condition and proposed targets, what are the overall processes that support transit asset improvements? Well, there are a few strategies for improving transit assets. One is through the MassDOT Capital Investment Plan, which allocates federal and state dollars to CIP programs that support MBTA and RTA asset improvements, and also considers asset condition and potential improvements when scoring candidate projects for the CIP. How does the MPO participate in this process? The MPO considers RTA investments when they are presented for inclusion in the upcoming Transit Improvement Program update. The MPO also considers opportunities to address transit asset management needs through projects that are part of the Transit Modernization Program. And MPO staff have been coordinating with the RTAs to discuss the kinds of projects that the Transit Modernization Program may support. Next slide, please. Given today's presentation of the targets, MPO staff requests that the Boston Region MPO move to support the staff recommended set of state fiscal year 2023 transit asset management targets. After adoption of the targets, the MPO incorporates the updated transit asset management targets and information on how planned investments affect TAM performance measures into the 2024 to 2028 TIP. And the approximate deadline for adopting these targets is March 31st. And with that, this presentation has concluded, and we will open up the floor to questions.
Questions for Sam or Angela? Eric Barassa.
Thank you, Sam and Angela, for a great presentation. I have kind of 3 questions, and I'll go through them here. The first question is, does the MBTA board get a similar presentation, and do they have to approve these performance measures? So that's my first question. My second question is, doing this on a yearly basis is good, but obviously it's hard to make a lot of improvement, just in 1 year. Is this also done at a longer time period, like for the 5-year CIP? Is there also an analysis done that looks at how to, reduce or improve these measures in a longer period? And then my third question is, or I guess more of a comment, the fixed guideway slow zones, obviously that's gotten a lot of media attention recently with the Orange Line shutdown and sort of tracking of slow zones. That's really a great progress that, the 5% of tracked efficiency can be improved to only 2%. That's like 6 miles to 2.5 miles. And that I just comment that seems like a really good improvement in 1 year.
Thanks for those questions, Eric. I think Jillian is on the call. I'll let her address some of this.
All right, sorry. Thanks, Eric. So in response to your first question about the MBTA board, we have incorporated this into presentations in the past. They are not required to formally approve them. However, they are aware of them. And they are also published in the MassDOT tracker document that is published each year. So there are a number of channels which this information is fed through. The third question was about track restrictions. What was the second question?
The second question was, does the MBTA, this is just for 1 year.
Yes.
It's hard to make a lot of progress in a year. I think we all know that. And so does the MBTA do this sort of analysis for like the 5-year CIP or some longer period?
Yes, the MPTA uses our asset inventories to inform all of our capital programming activities. This is a standalone effort that we do just directly in response to the federal requirements. It is, as Angela noted, we have a much more diverse set of assets, and we have a maturing asset management system. So the information that we use on the back end to help program investments is much more comprehensive than what is just reflected in the annual NTD report that we submit to the FTA.
Yeah, because like bridges are not included anywhere here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And so given that we are planning, and as you know, I mean, we have to plan years in advance to replace vehicles based on when we expect them to hit their useful life. So we are absolutely planning on a longer term than 1 year.
And then my third comment was about, the fixed guideway and the improvements there. And I don't know, that seems like, like I said, it's gotten a lot of attention and seems like that's a big priority for the agency.
Absolutely. It is directly tied to the caps that the MBTA is responding to as part of the FTA safety management inspection. And it is something that we are very aggressively addressing. However, as it has been noted, this is something that is rather fluid, and it will continue to change as inspections are ongoing, routine, and regular, and therefore we are constantly finding new things and also addressing them. So it is not, while this is just an annual target, we are tracking it on a much more routine basis that is informing our activities. And as Angela stated, it is an aggressive and ambitious goal, but we as an agency are, actively working towards it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Brad Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sam and Angela, for the helpful presentation. Look forward to continuing to support your work. Chair, just a couple of things that I would encourage this MPO and our partners at MBTA and elsewhere to think about going forward, because we heard you say, team, that this is an annual process. And so we will be having another conversation like this 1 year from now. I would hope that these asset management targets for both the MBTA and the RTAs continue to think about holistic systems for key indicators like safety. Clearly, workforce safety is a top priority. Ensuring that our garages and that our maintenance facilities are safe for the workforce is a top priority, in addition to customer safety. We have heard board members in recent weeks, Chair, talk about grade crossings for commuter rail and safety for the public at large. Want to make sure that's part of that holistic thinking in the long term. I also think it's really important from the inner core and the urban standpoint to talk about pedestrian safety as it relates to asset management. So things as simple as having an MBTA standard that if an MBTA-owned parking garage crosses a sidewalk in a pedestrian-rich environment, a standard could be established to have a raised crosswalk to ensure that motor vehicle operators are crossing the sidewalk at a slow and appropriate speed and reduce the likelihood of terrible things happening to people walking or using mobility assistance devices. The last thing I'd like to call our attention to, please, is the long-term chronic health impacts of emissions coming from fossil fuel use in our transit fleets. And I'd be interested to continue this conversation in the long term about our commitment to electrification of mass transit, both on the rail and the rubber tired type, to ensure that we understand things like disproportionate cardiac and pulmonary disease that we've already documented exist when you're close to, big highways, when you're close to big roadways, and when you're close to things like the MBTA's commuter rail facility in East Somerville, where we've got diesel trains, clearly contributing to local air quality challenges. So there's a bigger picture, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Red. Steve Olenoff?
Yeah, could we go back a few slides to the MPO responsibilities? That's too many, I think.
Yeah, you got it with your first go back.
Yeah, I think this was one slide, You're right? Right, MPO roles, the second bullet. No, first bullet, consider MBTA and RTA investments when they are presented for inclusion in the upcoming tip. Do we really do that, or to what extent do we do that, and how do we do that?
I guess I'll answer that one. So CADA, the MBTA, and the MWRTA annually present their TIP projects for inclusion. Those are, of course, a recommendation, and the MPO is free to adopt them or make changes. I'm not sure how the MPO would make changes to them and what would be the impact. But the MPO certainly can, when one of those transit agencies comes forward with their program, ask about something that you saw on this list. Like if you think, I'll just use the T because they're here. If you think the T isn't replacing their buses fast enough, you can ask them about that. And then they'll have an answer about how long it takes to replace buses and give you a schedule. But the MPO certainly has the programming authority to influence the transit agency decisions.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether we really do that as much as we should be doing.
Well, that I can't answer, but we certainly have the authority.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Brian Kane.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to note that because I am a perpetual PETA, pain in the you-know-what when it comes to these things, a special discussion was provided for me and some other members where we asked tons and tons of questions and did just what you suggested, Steve, which is kind of try to compare and contrast this stuff to what's in the draft CIP, et cetera. For the T, we did not discuss the RTAs. So just wanted to thank Jillian and everyone on the T side, Allie as well, who put this together and answered all of my incredibly annoying questions recently. Thank you.
And I will just note for the record that I'm sure none of those personal discussions violated the open meeting law.
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Brian. Other members? Seeing none, can you put up the motion so I can get it right and ask for a motion? So can I get a motion to incorporate the updated TAM targets? Please take it. Eric Barrasso.
Eric Barrasso with MAPC. I'll make a motion to approve these updated TAM targets.
Brian Kane.
As is my wanton life, I am happy to second Eric's motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
I think he's had to step away.
okay, he can come back. Allie Clayman,
Allie Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty, Okay. And come back. David Kozis,
David Kosis, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, sorry about that. Yes, please.
and we have Tom Bent now for City of Somerville.
Just a heads up, you missed your vote.
I know.
Judy, this is Brad Rossing. Can I vote for Somerville and Intercore on this particular item and then ask that you transition to Tom with the board member for stuff going forward? Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody.
And what is your vote, Brad?
Brad Rossing, yes.
Okay. Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
and we have Dylan Lukich for North Shore Task Force now.
Dylan Lukich, yes.
Okay. Melissa Tintakoulis,
Melissa Tintakoulis, yes.
Steve Olenoff,
Steve Olenoff, yes.
and Jay Monty, I see your hand up.
Jay Monty, yes.
Okay, and is John Romano here to vote?
I don't think he's back yet. He's got
Okay. Well, that calls the roll. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Angela and Sam. Great job.
Thank you.
I need to see the agenda. There you go. Next item on the agenda is the TIP Development Regional Transportation Authority Capital Planning Process. Shona Norman and Joy Glenn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shona Norman, and I am currently the interim administrator here at CADA, and I will be presenting our capital planning process for you today. In the next 4 slides, I will break down our process and will answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Because CADA is a relatively smaller operation than the other RTAs, we receive a limited amount of FTA 5307 funds, which is typically between $500,000 and $550,000. In the first quarter of the state fiscal year, we review any capital needs of our agency and project those needs and requirements for the next 5 years. Historically, CADA programs roughly $285,000 to $325,000 for preventive maintenance each year. Our transit asset management plan is then reviewed for any vehicle needs, as well as reviewing and discussing any other capital requirements, such as maintenance equipment, building repairs, and technology refreshment. Next slide, please. In quarters 2 and 3 of the state fiscal year, CADA prepares an internal final draft of the 5-year capital plan, and FTA announces the 5307 formula funds available for the Boston urbanized areas. After CADA's internal draft is complete, it is entered into the MassDOT eSTIP system, which will include all funding sources from FTA, MassDOT RTA CAP, and local funding sources. Upon the announcement of the available 5307 formula funds for the Boston urbanized areas, it is then a designated RTA will coordinate the distribution process. Once the distribution of formula funds are agreed to, CADA reviews, signs, and returns the split agreement to the coordinating RTA. Next slide, please. As part of the MassDOT Capital Investment Program, CADA is to provide background information to MassDOT for scoring RTA projects at which they review, approve, or disapprove any projects on the list. CADA's project list then moves to the MPO for review, discussion, and approval in the 4th quarter of the state fiscal year, where the Transportation Improvement Program is released and endorsed. After the successful endorsement of CADA's Transportation Improvement Program, FTA 5307 formula funds are applied for. Next slide, please. The Cape Ann Transportation Authority receives a small amount of 5307 funds each year, typically just over $500,000. CADA's federal fiscal year 22 allocation from the bipartisan infrastructure law is around $700,000. CADA programs $285,000 to $325,000 each year for preventive maintenance activities. This leaves a balance of $215,000 to $415,000 for all other capital activities. The following is CADA's 5-year scenario as submitted to MassDOT. in fiscal year 24, preventive maintenance, small capital, and the repaving of the parking lot for CADA's administration and operations facility. For fiscal year 25, preventive maintenance, small capital items, replacement of 3 vehicles that reached the end of their useful life in 22 and 23. Fiscal year 26, preventive maintenance, small capital items, replacement of 4 vehicles that reached the end of their useful life in 23 and 24. Fiscal year 27, preventive maintenance, general upkeep of administration and operations facility and small capital items and shop equipment. For fiscal year 28, preventive maintenance, general upkeep of administration and operations facility and small capital items and shop equipment. And that concludes our presentation, and I'm open to answer any questions you may have to the best of my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Norman? Brian, do you have your hand up, or is it still up from the last presentation? All right. Any questions? Thank you very much. Very thorough.
Thank you.
Joy, are you up now?
Yes, I am. Good morning. I'd like to introduce Tyler Tarasi. He would like to present. He is our grant support coordinator here. And it is a very similar presentation to Shona's, but we do have different projects and receive different funding. So I'll assist Tyler to turn on his microphone.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted. Can people hear me?
Yes, you are. We can hear you, Tyler.
Very good. So if we could advance to slide number 2. So this is very similar, as Joy stated, to Shona's presentation, but just to kind of go over what we do here for our capital planning process. We develop our 5-year project list for approval by our administrator. And we submit the project list via or to MassDOT. And as of this year, we're using the new eSTIP platform. eSTIP has been is going to be a very good platform. It allows for a lot more transparency to our stakeholders. We do still utilize the Grants Plus platform for things like our community transit grant program, C2GP application entry, as well as reporting, invoicing, and billing. So then the SIP becomes the TIP. So what happens is MassDOT submits our project list to the MPO, and they review and release and endorse the TIP at the end of May, and that becomes the STIP. And MassDOT incorporates the MPO endorsed TIP into the STIP. And the MWRTA is eligible to apply for FTA funds in TRAMS, which is the federal database, upon STIP approval. Go to the next slide. So this is an outline of how things work per quarter. So in Q1, we assess our capital needs using a 5-year perspective. We program demand response, ADA paratransit service each year. Then our vehicle needs are reviewed to align with our transit asset management, or TAM, plan and goals. Then we review our other capital enhancements and requirements for potential improvement. One being building and vehicle maintenance, tech and software, and that's included things like solar photovoltaic, or PV, and IT, etc. Safety and security, capital outreach, and etc. And then moving on to Q2, we prepare a 5-year draft capital plan. We enter that 5-year capital plan into the eSTIP program, as I mentioned now, that we're using for MassDOT's review and approval. We entered the 5-year capital plan into the ESTIP plan and system there. So now moving on to the next slide. Continuing into Q3. So we announced the 5307 formula funds after this for the Boston urbanized area that we received. The split agreement between the RTA and the UZA is distributed among designated recipients. And an agreed upon formula is discussed and approved. We then review that agreement and sign and return it to the coordinator. And moving on to Q4, we provide supporting information about our projects to MassDOT for scoring. MassDOT reviews the process or the projects, I should say, and through a competitive process, they determine what projects they're going to support. And then our project list moves to the MPO for approval in April. The TIP is released and endorsed in May, as I mentioned before. And the endorsement of the TIP to the STIP is required in order for us to be able to apply for the FTA 5307 funds through the TRAMS platform. All right, and this slide here just outlines our projects. It's pretty self-explanatory. If we can move on, I think. Most of the projects are pretty much the same. There's a little bit of change in the outer years, as you'll see. We're going to be applying for things like cameras, security devices, EV modernization of infrastructure. I think that pretty much covers it. You can see from our list that we have a lot of things in store. So I will turn it back over to our grants manager, Joy Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Joy.
Okay, thank you. And are there any questions?
Any questions from the members for the RTA? Seeing none. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Tyler.
Great, thank you so much.
And the next item on our agenda is presentation of MPO target funded projects with cost increases. Ethan LaPointe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. This presentation will cover some of the 4 target funded projects in the current federal fiscal years 2023 to 27 TIP that were identified as having cost increases above the MPO's approved thresholds as part of the TIP Readiness Days activities last month. If we move on to the next slide, we can give a brief overview on today's presentation. This presentation will begin with, or rather move into a thorough review of each of the cost increases by project, along with some background on what the scopes of work for those projects are, then with some next steps regarding how this discussion falls into the greater scheme of the TIP timeline, namely with the development of scenarios at coming MPO board meetings, and then we'll wrap up with the discussion. If we go on to the next slide, in advance of this presentation, staff reposted an existing TIP readiness scenario table that was presented to the MPO board at the February 16th meeting, again for review here. This table shows these project increases for all projects in the TIP. This table also highlights for cost increases any project that had a $500,000 increase or a 25% increase in its cost. The thresholds being discussed today, which are the ones approved by the MPO board, are a little bit different from there. If we go on to the next slide, we can go into a little bit more detail, and one more, please, to start discussing what these thresholds actually are. Now, effective November 2021, the current tip being fiscal years 23 to 27 is the first really to have these thresholds applied in full for its duration. Namely, the threshold being, or rather policy here being discussed today is policy number 3, which is the policy for rescoring projects where costs may increase beyond a specified threshold. These thresholds have really go in two directions. For projects that are estimated to cost more than $10 million, the threshold is triggered should there be a cost increase that is greater than $2.5 million. For any projects below that $10 million threshold, an increase of 25% or greater in cost would trigger it. If we go on to the next slide, we can talk about some of the implications here. For any of the 4 projects today that breach these thresholds, the board may decide or request any of the following. This includes additional information regarding from project proponents or municipalities regarding the sources of the cost increases, which I will be providing some detail here today. A rescoring of a project if its cost increase is the result of a change in project scope of work, and that may entail, based on that change in the scope of work, a comparative analysis on whether or not that project's cost per point, namely the cost that is assigned by staff to that project, compares against those other tip projects, and potentially whether or not a project cost increase should be funded with regional target funding, other sources, or not funded at all. In this case, I would also like to mention before we move forward in the presentation that we also have some of our project proponents here today. So while I will be discussing some of the sources of the cost increases, I am happy to answer additional questions at the end of this presentation, but they may also be available to provide additional clarity. Going on, we can start discussing the projects at a broad overview on the next slide with a table showing the 4 projects discussed here today. After this slide, we'll have individual discussions about each of the projects, or rather individual reviews on each of the projects, but all projects discussed here today fall in federal fiscal year 2024. This is the Justice Cushing Highway Reconstruction Project in both Cohasset and Scituate, whose current budget of $12.5 million has been revised up to $17.6 million. This constitutes an increase of $5.1 million, or 40.78%. The next project is the reconstruction of Foster Street in Littleton, with a current budget of approximately $4 million, or 3.99, revised up to about 5.37 or 5.4 million. This is an increase that amounts to $1.378 million, or 34.52%. The third being Peabody's Independence Greenway extension. This is a bicycle network and pedestrian connections project with a current budget of $3,922,000, with a revised budget of $5,221,000, an increase of $1.3 million roughly, with a 33.13% increase. And fourth is Rentham's I-495 Route 1A ramp reconfiguration project, whose budget currently is $5.58 million, going up to $20.92, a $5.33 million increase, or 34.22%. And again, all of these are currently regionally target funded projects. If we go on to the next slide, we can start off by reviewing these projects individually, starting off with the Cohasset Scituate corridor improvements on Justice Cushing Highway. The project proponent for this effort is MassDOT, but this project also spans between 2 municipalities, Cohasset and Scituate. As mentioned, the new estimated budget for this project is $17.6 million, an increase of about 40.78%. These projects were actually scored under a different scoring system for the tip back before, I believe, the 22 to 26 tip. Prior to that, when the scoring criteria that staff employed used a 134-point scale versus the current scale of 100 points. During that scoring process, the project therefore received a score of 37 out of 134. Its current project status, based on project info, is the completion of 100% design plans, and the result of those 100% design plans entailed some additional adjustments to the scope of work, and also in addition to some inflationary cost pressures that have kind of changed the estimated cost for this project. Namely, based on some of the analyses here with box widening along the current roadway geometry, additional areas of full depth pavement reconstruction have been identified in the project limits and added to the contract, therefore increasing price. This was largely driven by the addition of a 2-foot buffer for each of the bicycle lanes on both sides of the project's limits, and those bicycle lanes being for a 5-foot lane facility. In addition, there were also additional drainage improvements incorporated into the project limits to improve the water capture capacity of the lands along this roadway, including the addition of rock catchments. This project's scope, when it was applied for, entailed complete streets improvements along the Chief Justice Cushing Highway from Beechwood Street roughly to the Cohasset-Scituate town line, but really all the way to Henry Turner Bailey Road down in Scituate. It also includes signal upgrades at the 3A Beechwood Street intersection. And as stated, this project has recently achieved a 100% design submission, which is where these costs were identified. Going on to the next project, this takes us to Littleton's reconstruction of Foster Street project. The new estimated budget for this project is $5,370,950, an increase of 34.52%. And similar to the last project, it was scored under the old criteria system, where it earned 38 out of 134 points. The project proponent for this project is Littleton, and similarly, this project has also achieved a 100% design package. The project mostly includes traffic safety improvements for all mode users, including active transportation, and this includes both turning lanes and also curb cuts for pedestrians. The project includes full accommodations for bicycle and pedestrian travel, signage, and wayfinding, particularly with regard to its proximity to the Littleton Route 495 commuter rail station. And the increases witnessed here were largely driven by inflationary cost pressure. For example, this was about 80% of the overall cost increase, driven largely by work categories and items like earth borrows, cost of loam, granite curbing, and other items. There was also the addition of about 1 inch of pavement overlay added to the contract in order to improve the base course on the roadway tarmac to ensure that it holds up for a longer useful life. If we go on to the next project, this will take us into the Independence Greenway extension in Peabody. Project proponent here, again, is Peabody, with the new budget estimated at $5,221,550, a 33.13% increase. This project's current status when this slide deck was developed was PRC approval. However, the project has actually moved from 25% design internally over to 75% design. Again, what has prompted these cost increases, or rather the identification of their sources. The score for this project is 34 out of 134 points, and largely entails a 1.3-mile greenway extension from the North Shore Mall to Warren Street. Once this extension is completed, that will bring the entirety of the Independence Greenway to a complete length of 8 miles. This project also entails the traversal of Route 128 as part of the Greenway. The main driver on this project, again, was inflationary cost pressure, a recurring theme in this presentation, but the project also had its scope adjusted to improve safety accommodations for bicycle users, especially at that Route 128 crossing. There were also additional increased costs for the loam and plantings along the project limits, and hydraulic analysis in the project area yielded the need for improved water openings for 2 culverts near the existing rail bed in that area to improve stormwater capture and water quality along the passageway. And last but not least, if we move on to the Route 1A I-495 ramps project in Rentham, the project proponent for this project is MassDOT, but the project is located in Rentham. The current budget for this project, or rather the new one, is $20.92 million, an increase of 34.22%. The project scored 55 out of 134 points under the older scale and is currently at a 75% design status based on project info. This project's overall high-level view of scope regards ramp adjustments at the 495 1A ramps to accommodate increases in potential traffic capacity, but also installs median islands to facilitate traffic calming for all users. While inflationary pressure was one driver of cost here, the project's scope of work has actually been adjusted significantly to incorporate additional multimodal elements, namely the addition of bilateral shared use paths thanks to current roadway dimensions versus the initial scopes estimate for a shared use path only on one side of the roadway. This project also includes signalized crossings for those paths at each of the ramps and new crosswalks as well throughout the project limits. There's also the addition of turn lanes where the Rentham Outlets point of access is, for those that are familiar with the area, to accommodate traffic flow in and out of that commercial district. And again, those paths and also those intersections will be fully signalized and bilateral for this roadway. With that, that was a lot of information for 4 projects. So if we can move on to the next slide, we can talk about some next steps. Staff are happy to clarify any, go on to the next slide, please. Staff are happy to clarify any information presented today, including answering any questions on project cost increases, not only with regard to what I can offer here, but also any of the project proponents present here. Moreover, we're also happy to have a discussion on the implications of how these projects may be programmed for the 24 to 28 tip, based on the readiness scenarios, the discussion for which will happen at next week's MPO board meeting. With that, be happy to move to discussion.
Thank you, Ethan. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you. And so I noticed all of them have an inflationary component. The last one seemed to have a qualitatively different inflationary component from the way that you described it. Can you give a sense of the inflationary aspect? Like what percentage of the increase that we're seeing is related to inflation for the 4 projects?
Regarding inflationary increases, that varies from project to project, so I can't speak to the way that inflation may factor in with regard to the overall increase. It is one component of the scope. I don't know if any project proponent would be available to answer that.
Okay, well, hopefully they can. I'm sure they'll speak at some point. Maybe soon. So, because I'll ask something else. And that is related to the scores. We had conversations, so I'm not going to just cavalierly ask me for rescore, because I know that's a big endeavor. But I like what I hear about the change in the scopes of these projects, and it does seem to me as if it would increase their scores, especially for some of the criteria that I care about more. It'd be nice if we could get some insight into that, so that's it. I guess the last thing I'll say is that when we were talking about the cost increases, we were seeing most of them, if I recall correctly, from PRC to I think 75%. We're seeing now a lot of big increases between 75% and 100%, and that's fine. It is what it is. It's just for me, it's like predictability is what's most important. So when we program something, if we need to keep some money aside because we are somewhat confident the costs are going to go up, then that helps us in terms of decision making. That's it. Thank you.
Other questions from MPO members? Eric Barassa.
Ethan, thank you. And I really appreciate you putting this together. This is, I think, a great example of, that policy that we adopted a year or so ago to kind of bring this information back to the MPO to better understand, why these projects have gone up in cost. And I think for most of them, their scope had changed in many ways, I think, were improved. Now, one thing I didn't catch, did you say that these projects will be rescored?
That is up to the board as part of the policies that were approved during the round of last year's TIP. The board can vote to request that staff rescore.
Okay, you'd be looking for that guidance for us. Personally, all of those explanations seemed very sound to me. I'd be interested in what others, think, particularly folks who are part of that, that committee. But I don't necessarily feel like these projects need to be rescored. They all see, all those increases seem relatively reasonable to me.
Thank you, Eric. Alec Clayman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ethan, for that detailed presentation. I just had 2 questions. One, I was trying to remember, and I don't know if you will know this, but the Cohasset and Situate project, I thought that was tied to a study that MPO staff did about that corridor.
I cannot say I'm personally familiar with that study, but I will circle back and get back to you on that. I can also provide those materials in the future.
Yeah, it's probably not that important. I know the MPO always likes to see, the studies that the staff do actually get constructed. And the other question I had is just all of these projects are in FY24, I think you said. And so even just looking at the handout, even with the cost increases accommodated for, we would be looking at the 32.8 million available in that year. Am I understanding that correctly?
Approximately, but we'll have that discussion more next week when we have the numbers more finalized.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Other members before I call on non-members? Seeing none. Oliveira R, please state your name for the record. And I apologize if I mispronounced.
Good morning, Rich Oliveira. I'm from Mass Highway, District 5 projects design. And to answer Ally's question, this was Cohasset project was a result of a CTPS study done in the early 2010s that I recall Pam being involved with early, but we did get that report and that study before the design, or when the design was initiated.
Thank you, Rich.
You're welcome.
Sean Handy.
Hello, I'm Sean Handy. I'm also from the Mass DOT District 5 project section. Just wanted to say that as far as the Rentham project, if there were any questions, I could potentially add a little information as far as on the technical end of the complete streets accommodations that were added, but it sounds like they're fairly straightforward, but if there are any questions, I'm here.
Thank you. Ed Grassa.
I mean, I would say if there are any project proponents or district officials who could speak to, a little more about these, I think that's great, as long as you're here, just quickly. I mean, that's the whole point of this, I think, is for us to just kind of better understand what some of these changes are.
Sean, you want to give us a quick rundown on Rentham?
Sure. So I've got my notes here. Generally, as you noted, the original shared use path design was just for one side of Route 1A. And as the design progressed, I think it was determined that based on the likely pedestrian traffic that this area can see with the outlets there and everything, that it was more warranted to have it on both sides. This included carrying the path underneath the 495 bridge, and what that required in order to get the additional cross section was some sizable retaining walls on either side of the roadway in order to elevate the path up in order to get the proper width, and that for approximately 400 feet on either side of the road. So that that in itself was part of the significant cost that went up. The other thing was that, as you noted, the ramp, the ends of the ramps coming down to Route 1A, initially it wasn't intended that they would be signalized, but again, once the design progressed and the review teams got a little more involved and looking at it closer, it was determined that those all those pedestrian crossings for safety reasons were required to have the appropriate signalization. And kind of going along with that, we also, it was determined that additional crosswalks across 1A itself for safety reasons were appropriate for this. So generally a lot of kind of complete streets, ped bike type of accommodations that were looked at with a little more clarity as we went along, or caused it. As far as the inflation element goes that was mentioned, I don't have a hard number or a real quantitative number of what the inflation raise was for all the items and the cost estimate, but I can just tell you that we're seeing a similar rise in many of the unit prices for all of our construction projects across the board over the last year or year and a half. And, I'm not, don't have any real tangible insights into what's affecting that. I'm sure it's a pretty, a lot of other aspects of what's been going on that affect it. But anyways, that's generally.
Thanks, Sean. Any other comments or questions? Lynn Diggins.
Thanks. Well, I can appreciate that. You may not know the reasons, but it'd be nice to have a handle on about how much it is, because I think the inflation's here for a while. So it'd be a good idea to have it'd be good to have a sense of how this is going to affect us going forward. And that is one of the things that we are going to take into consideration. And with respect to scoring, so, I would like for us to rescore, not to determine whether or not we go forward with these. I think we're probably going to remain committed to them. I'm fine with that. But I think it'd be good to get a sense as to whether the scores change, as a result of these increases to a certain extent, increases in scope. But from what the gentleman just described, there are costs, to a certain extent, that are coming about just from keeping certain pedestrian aspects. So it may be that we don't capture that in the scores, and that would be good to know. So if we could just take maybe one of these, maybe the last one, and rescore it, and I think there'll be two aspects to that. We'll have to have the score, the current score adjusted, maybe rescore according to our current metrics, the project, and then as it was, and then scoring for the changes. Sorry, that last bit got a little bit confusing. If I need to explain it, let me know. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. Don Bent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think my, being on the committee, part of me agrees with what Eric said about, the increases seem justifiable, but where I'm a little hung up, and, I brought this up, I've been concerned about inflationary increases all year long, because, in my own business, I've been seeing it, it's drastic. I don't know if it would be helpful. I know it would be helpful for me if we saw something, a project that increased 34%. It would be helpful on my end to understand what was the inflationary percentage of that increase. So I don't know if that's something that we could get for next week. Whether that would help me decide whether or not I think we needed it to be rescored, because if a large piece of that is because of inflationary issues that's really out of everybody's control right now, it's a little bit easier for me to kind of accept a large increase on a project if, say, the inflationary was out of the 34% increase, the inflationary is 15 or 18%. So being able to understand that would be it would be helpful for me. I don't know how difficult that would be to do, though. So that's kind of where I am on this.
Thank you, Tom. Tim Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. Is there another part of this discussion, a third bullet discussed from programming implications, or is this the point at which to discuss questions about that, not just these?
So next week, we will be discussing scenarios, and Ally sort of raised the issue about it to Ethan, and Ethan said, that's a discussion for next week. Basically, because of readiness, we probably have enough money to accommodate all of these increases. So that's sort of out there. We all know that, but we're going to have that discussion. I think it's next week, right, Ethan? Ethan's shaking his head.
Yes, and also on the 30th at the subsequent meeting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That being said, Ken, if you want to bring something up, feel free.
Well, just a question, the table showing all the projects, again, it shows, I think I may have mentioned this before, I'm pretty sure I have, is that, what does it mean when is the design status, when it says 100% or 25, is that say 25% approved or 25% submitted. I think that's a very helpful distinction. If it would be possible to put that in the table itself, so we don't have to ask that question every time. So does that mean what's in the table? Does that mean a certain one or the other, or?
Ethan?
In the table, there is not a differentiation, and I agree with you that it would be helpful to have that distinction. So going forward, that will appear.
Great, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Rich, do you have your hand up because you want to comment again? Or is your hand up still up from last time I called on you?
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Ethan enumerated about the Cohasset Situate project. He covered it pretty well, but the project got a lot of second and third looks with respect to the bike and pet accommodations. It started in the mid-2010s when we were under One Healthy Transportation Directive, and then we transitioned into the next, the update, the next one, which caused the the additional scrutiny. So there was some redesign with that, and then as a result of redesigning and tweaking the design, it kind of dominoes in and it affects some other things, which just increases the cost of the project naturally. The limits of work did not change, but as a result of changing the typical section for the road, some of that required more full depth construction, and in conjunction with the increase in hot mix asphalt, unit prices, that kind of contributed significantly to the costs as well. Also, we found many drainage connections from private properties to the state drainage system, and these were found, in the kind of even at the 25% stage. And then but it takes time to really research these with the consultant. And as a result of that, we found that there's a water course coming from north of the project through the road, under the road to south of the project, where we had to increase the capacity of a culvert. And this was just a natural offshoot of studying the whole drainage of the roadway itself. So the corridor is an old corridor. It hasn't been really, updated for a very long time. So this contributed to a lot of the increase as a result of the design, and it has been with us for a while. So it started in the mid-2010s. So the scope, like I said, the limits of work did increase, but the scope within the limits just kind of got compounded by various design elements.
Thank you, Rich.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Lynn Diggins.
I just want to say one more thing, and that is that I'm very supportive of these projects and the changes. And so to the extent I'm asking you for more information, it's really just to understand, so that, we can have a better handle on things and be able to predict me. But yeah, I'm very happy with these projects and the changes, and I think they're all good. Thank you.
Eric Barassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In relation to sort of the discussion at the next meeting about the program, implications and sort of starting to program scenarios, I'm assuming that there will be additional MassDOT sort of highway priority projects that will probably be presented at that meeting, and I'm also hopeful that the MBTA has some overview of projects, particularly in relationship to the transit modernization program that will be presented. And I just want to make sure that we do have some time, for a couple meetings to see scenarios, for people to be able to digest some of that information, and then for us to come back on the 30th and make some preliminary decisions to staff in anticipation of, I think it's the April, it's like a mid-April meeting where we're looking to put out the tip for the public comment period.
I see Ethan shaking his head, so I think, yes, what you've documented is the process.
That's correct, Ethan?
Yes, that is correct.
Brian King.
Thanks, David. I'm just looking at my notes from the last time we met, and I have noted that today the T was going to come with some projects for us to consider.
Right.
Did I note that wrong, or did something change?
So that was tentative. So what changed is the project list is not ready yet.
Does that mean the T's not ready to give it to us?
Yes, what that means is the project list is an internal review and will be provided when it's ready.
And would that come off of their 22 CIP, or would it come off of the current CIP under development? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm not sure anybody can answer that question yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Other comments? Seeing none. Ethan, did you get everything you needed from us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's all I need.
Excellent. Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? John Romano.
Hi, Dave. I just want to let people know that next week on March 14th and 15th, Mass DOT will be having meetings on the Sumner Tunnel closure over the summer, virtual meetings. So if anybody's interested, Dave, I don't know if I could, can I give the flyer to somebody that on your staff or at CTPS that can post it on the website or something? I should have thought about it.
Yeah, John, just get it to Derek Cravat and he'll work with the MPO to get it up on their website.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Brian, you got something?
Yeah, I just want to wish Tegan Tyke congratulations and good luck on her upcoming big life event. Good luck, Tegan. We'll see you when you get back.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. That's very nice of you. Any other comments, questions, member items?
I'm a very nice guy, David.
I've always said that, Brian. But since you have your hand up, Brian, why don't you give me a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Lynn Diggins.
Lynn Diggins seconds.
Motion have been made and seconded. Don't forget, we're meeting next week to talk about tip scenarios. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Have a nice trip, Tegan.